Hey everyone, throwaway account here because I don't even know where to begin with this mess. I'm a 35-year-old dad, and my world turned upside down a month ago. Honestly, I've been sitting on this trying to figure out how to process it. I still don't have a clue. So here's how it started. My daughter, Katie, who's 10, was cleaning out some old DVDs in the living room. You know, one of those rainy day chores we assign kids just to keep them busy. She found this plain, unlabeled disc tucked away at the back of a drawer. Being curious, she popped it into the player while I was upstairs working on something. She called me down, all excited, saying, "Dad, I found one of Mommy's secret movies." I wasn't too concerned at first, but I walked in and the look on her face broke me. She was frozen, staring at the screen, confused. I turned my head and my heart dropped. There it was, footage of my wife, Sarah, 34, with another man. Not just hugging or some harmless flirting, but everything. It was dated about 2 years ago. I immediately grabbed the remote and turned it off. Katie looked at me confused and asked, "Why is Mommy kissing someone else?" My hands were shaking and I didn't know what to say. I told her it was probably a movie Sarah was in, she's not an actress by the way, just to get her out of the room. She didn't look convinced but didn't argue. I told her to go play upstairs. As soon as Katie left, I locked the door and watched the rest of the DVD. My gut said don't, but my brain wouldn't let it go. It wasn't just one guy. There were multiple clips over what looked like months. The timestamps all overlapped with a period when I thought we were happy. Family trips, holidays, date nights. She was living a double life right under my nose. I felt sick. My first instinct was to smash the DVD player. Instead, I ejected the disc, shoved it into my pocket, and sat there for what felt like hours. When Sarah came home that evening, I couldn't even look at her. She walked in, kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong, and started chatting about her day. I just nodded, playing along while my mind raced. I didn't confront her that night. Maybe I should have, but I wanted to think everything through. Was this still going on? Was Katie even my daughter? Could I handle this on my own without her noticing? And that's where this nightmare began. That night I couldn't sleep. Sarah was lying next to me, sound asleep like she didn't have a care in the world, while my mind was spiraling. Every moment of our relationship started replaying in my head. I thought about all those late nights she said she was working overtime, the girls' trips, the sudden distance that I had brushed off as stress. How could I have been so blind? Katie's question kept ringing in my ears. Why is Mommy kissing someone else? I couldn't let it go. If she was lying about this, what else was she hiding? Was my whole marriage just a joke to her? The next day, I told Sarah I wasn't feeling well and stayed home while she went to work and Katie was at school. I needed to gather myself, figure out my next move. First, I went back to the DVD. I didn't want to, but I felt like I had to know everything. I watched every clip, taking notes on dates and locations I could recognize. Some of the videos were shot in hotel rooms I didn't recognize, but others? They were at our home. Our bedroom. I can't describe the rage I felt seeing some random guy in my bed. Our bed. I started noticing little details. One of the guys had a tattoo on his wrist, something distinct. Another had a habit of wearing a certain brand of watch. I didn't know who they were, but those details burned into my brain. Then, I started digging. I knew Sarah had an old laptop she rarely used anymore. It was buried in a drawer in our bedroom, and I decided to take a look. She had always been protective of her phone, but the laptop? She probably forgot it even existed. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Emails, photos, even calendar entries. She had been sloppy, like she never thought she'd get caught. There were messages with one of the guys, talking about sneaking away during a weekend I remembered as a family trip. I found saved hotel confirmations, and even an email from her to one of her friends, venting about feeling stuck in our marriage. Stuck. That word kept stabbing at me. She never once said anything like that to me. I thought we were solid. I thought she was happy. She could have talked to me, we could have worked through it, but instead she chose this. By the time Katie came home, I'd managed to put the laptop back and act like nothing had happened. Sarah came home later and I was watching her like a hawk. Every smile, every laugh, it all seemed fake now. I felt like I didn't even know who she was. But the worst part? Katie was caught in the middle. Every time I looked at her, I couldn't stop thinking, is she mine? The thought made me feel like the worst father in the world, but it was there, eating away at me. I had to know. The next morning, I ordered a DNA testing kit online. I felt guilty, but I told myself it wasn't about doubting Katie, it was about knowing the truth. If Sarah had been lying to me about everything else, I couldn't trust her on this either. I started keeping my distance from Sarah and she noticed. She asked if I was okay, and I just said work was stressing me out. She offered to help, even made me dinner one night, acting like she was still the perfect wife. It took everything in me not to blow up at her. I felt like a volcano, ready to erupt at any moment. But I wasn't ready yet. I needed all the pieces first. I needed to be sure before I confronted her, for Katie's sake if nothing else. The DNA test arrived 2 days later. I waited until Sarah left for the gym, then swabbed Katie's cheek while she thought we were doing a fun science experiment for school. She giggled, totally unaware of what I was really doing, and it broke my heart. The test was sent off the same day, and then it was just a waiting game. But even with everything I had found, I wasn't ready for the results. The waiting nearly killed me. Every day I was checking my email like a madman, hoping for the results to come in. During those days I started paying more attention to Sarah. It was like my eyes had finally opened. All the little things I used to overlook stood out now. The way she'd always have her phone glued to her hand, the weird excuses for why she couldn't come to certain family events, the sudden girls' weekends that seemed to pop up out of nowhere. I started noticing how often she was texting someone. She'd smile at her phone and quickly put it down when I walked into the room. Once, I asked who she was talking to and she gave me a short, "Oh, just Amy." I nodded and let it slide, but inside I felt like screaming. When the DNA results finally came in, I almost didn't want to open them. My hands were trembling as I clicked the email. I stared at the words for what felt like hours. Katie is 99.9% my biological child. The wave of relief that washed over me was overwhelming. I didn't even realize I was crying until I felt the tears dripping onto my hands. Katie was mine, my little girl. No one could take that from me. For a brief moment, I felt like I had something solid to hold onto in the middle of all this chaos. But the relief didn't last long. The reality of Sarah's betrayal was still hanging over me, and now I had no excuse not to confront her. I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I had all the proof I needed. The DVD, the emails, the DNA test. Even if it didn't confirm my worst fear, it proved how far gone my trust was. It was time to face the storm head-on. That night, after Katie went to bed, I told Sarah we needed to talk. She looked surprised but sat down across from me at the kitchen table. I don't think I've ever felt my heart pound so hard. I started off calm. I told her I had found something while cleaning up. Her face didn't change at first, but when I pulled the DVD out of my pocket and set it on the table, she froze. The color drained from her face, and for the first time in years she was speechless. "What is this, Sarah?" I asked. My voice was steady, but inside I was boiling. She stared at the disc like it was a bomb about to go off. Where did you find that?" She stammered. "Katie found it," I said, my voice sharper now. "She saw part of it. Do you have any idea what that did to her?" "What that did to me?" Her hands flew to her mouth and tears started streaming down her face. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for you to..." I cut her off. "Don't. Just don't. Don't sit here and act like this was some accident. This wasn't one mistake, Sarah. This was months, years of you lying to me, to our daughter. Do you have any idea how much damage you've done?" She kept crying, muttering things like, "I'm sorry, and I didn't mean for it to go this far," but I wasn't letting her off that easy. I wanted answers. "Who are they?" I demanded. "The men in these videos. Who are they?" She shook her head, barely able to speak. It doesn't matter. They don't mean anything to me." "Doesn't matter?" I slammed my hand on the table and she flinched. "It matters to me. You brought strangers into our home, into our bed, Sarah. You put our family at risk for what? What were you even thinking?" She finally broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. I was stupid, okay? I was lonely. You were always working and I felt invisible. I didn't know how to tell you, so I made a mistake. A terrible, terrible mistake. I laughed bitterly. A mistake? Sarah, a mistake is forgetting our anniversary or burning dinner. This was calculated. You planned this. You recorded this. How many mistakes did you make, huh? How many lies did you tell to cover it up? She didn't answer. She just sat there, crying. And for the first time in our marriage, I felt nothing but disgust toward her. I stood up and walked out of the room, leaving her at the table. I needed air, space, anything to keep me from saying something I couldn't take back. But one thing was clear: this wasn't over, not by a long shot. I spent the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation in my head over and over. The way Sarah cried, the excuses, the pathetic "I was lonely" line. None of it made sense to me. How do you justify tearing apart your family for, what? A thrill? Attention? It didn't add up, and I wasn't buying her version of the story. The next morning, Sarah tried to talk to me. She followed me into the kitchen while I was making Katie's breakfast, her eyes red and puffy like she hadn't slept either. "Can we please talk?" she whispered, careful not to wake Katie. "Not now," I snapped. "I need to focus on our daughter. You know, the one you betrayed too." That shut her up. She stood there awkwardly for a moment before retreating to the bedroom. Katie came downstairs a few minutes later, oblivious to the tension in the air. She was all smiles, chatting about her school project while I did my best to act normal. But every time I looked at her, I felt a knot in my stomach. She didn't deserve this. None of it. Once Katie was at school, I decided it was time to get some real answers. Sarah was sitting on the edge of our bed, staring blankly at the floor when I walked in. I didn't waste time. "Start talking," I said. "And this time I want the truth. All of it." She looked up at me, her expression a mix of shame and fear. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," I said, folding my arms. "How long has this been going on? Who were the guys? Were they random or were they people we know? And don't even think about lying to me, Sarah. I've seen the emails, the videos. I already know more than you think." Her face crumpled and she started crying again. "It was just two guys," she admitted. "One of them. I met him online. It was stupid, I know, but I was feeling so alone and he was there. He listened. And the other?" I pressed. She hesitated, which immediately raised my suspicions. He was someone we know." I felt my blood boil. "Who?" "It doesn't matter," she said quickly. "It's over." It meant nothing. "Don't you dare tell me it doesn't matter," I shouted. "I have a right to know who you brought into our lives, into our home. Was it someone from work? A friend? Someone Katie knows? Who was it, Sarah?" She hesitated again, but finally she whispered, "It was Mark." I froze. Mark. My best friend. The guy I'd trusted with everything, my secrets, my struggles, my family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mark." I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. "You slept with Mark? In our house? Around our daughter?" She flinched but didn't deny it. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "It was a mistake. I wasn't thinking." "You weren't thinking?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "You were thinking enough to plan it, to hide it, to record it. Don't stand there and insult my intelligence by calling it a mistake." She started sobbing again, but I was done feeling sorry for her. I grabbed my car keys and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" she called after me, her voice panicked. "Out," I said without looking back. "I can't be around you right now." I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind racing. Mark. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. It wasn't just my wife, it was my best friend. I started remembering all the times Mark had been over, all the times he joked about helping out if I was ever too busy. I'd laughed it off back then, never suspecting a thing. Now it all made me sick. I stopped at a park eventually, sitting on a bench and staring at the ground. I felt numb, like I was watching my life fall apart from a distance. I didn't know what to do, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just about Sarah anymore. Mark was going to answer for this too. After hours of driving and stewing in my anger, I finally decided I needed to confront Mark. I wasn't sure what I was going to say or do, but I knew I couldn't let this sit. I drove straight to his house, adrenaline pumping the entire way. Mark lived alone in a small apartment on the other side of town. As I pulled into the parking lot, my stomach churned. This was a guy I trusted with everything, someone I considered closer than a brother. And now I couldn't even think his name without wanting to punch something. I knocked on his door hard. A part of me hoped he wasn't home so I could buy myself more time to figure out what the hell I was doing. But of course my luck wasn't that good. A few moments later the door opened and there he was, Mark, standing there in sweatpants and a t-shirt, looking completely normal, like he hadn't destroyed my life. "Hey man," he said, his face lighting up like nothing was wrong. "What's up? You okay?" I didn't answer. I just stared at him, trying to keep myself from lunging forward. Finally I said, "We need to talk." His smile faded a little. Sure. Come in." I stepped inside, the air between us thick with tension. He offered me a drink but I waved it off. I didn't want his hospitality, I wanted answers. "Is there something you want to tell me, Mark?" I asked, my voice low and steady. He frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I said, my temper rising. "I know about you and Sarah. I know what you've been doing behind my back." His face went pale and he took a step back. I don't know what you're talking about." I laughed bitterly. "Cut the crap, Mark. I have the proof. The videos, the emails. You're not going to weasel your way out of this." For a moment he just stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like he was trying to come up with something to say. Then finally he sighed and sat down on the edge of his couch, burying his face in his hands. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he said quietly. It just did." I clenched my fists, trying to keep my anger in check. "You were my best friend," I said, my voice shaking. "How could you do this to me? To Katie? You were in my house, around my family, pretending to be my friend while you were screwing my wife." "I'm sorry," he said, looking up at me with tears in his eyes. "I know that doesn't mean much, but I am. I don't even know what to say, man. It was stupid. I was stupid. She said she was unhappy and—" "Stop," I said, cutting him off. "Don't you dare try to blame this on her. I'm not here to hear your excuses. I want to know why. Why did you do it?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't know, man. I guess I was jealous. You had the perfect life, the wife, the kid, the job. I was going through a rough time and she was there. I wasn't thinking straight." "You weren't thinking straight?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You were thinking straight enough to sneak around behind my back. You were thinking straight enough to lie to my face every time we hung out. Don't act like this was some accident." He looked down, ashamed. "I know I messed up," he said. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't know. I'm sorry." I shook my head, disgusted. "Sorry doesn't cut it, Mark. Not this time." For a moment, neither of us said anything. The silence was suffocating. Finally, I turned to leave. "You're dead to me," I said as I walked out the door. "Don't ever come near me or my family again." As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, betrayal, and strangely enough, a small sense of closure. I didn't have all the answers, but at least now I knew. Now I could focus on what came next. When I got home after confronting Mark, I expected to find Sarah sitting on the couch, waiting to plead her case again. Instead, the house was eerily quiet. I walked into the kitchen and found a note on the counter. It read, "I'm staying at my sister's for a few days. I need to give you space. Please don't make any decisions about us until we've talked more. I love you." I crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. "Decisions?" I muttered to myself. As if there was anything left to decide. That evening it was just me and Katie. I tried to act normal, but she was too smart for that. As we were sitting on the couch watching one of her favorite shows, she turned to me, her big, curious eyes searching my face. "Dad?" she asked softly. "What's up, kiddo?" I said, bracing myself. "Is Mommy in trouble?" Her question hit me like a freight train. I wasn't ready for this. "Why would you ask that?" I asked, keeping my tone as light as I could. She shrugged. "You've been acting weird and now Mommy's not here. Did I do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," I said quickly, pulling her into a hug. "You didn't do anything wrong. This has nothing to do with you, okay? Mommy and we just have some things to figure out." "Is it because of the movie I found?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I froze. I'd been hoping she'd forgotten about that. "What do you mean?" "I saw some of it," she admitted, looking down at her hands. "I didn't understand, but I knew it wasn't good." "Is that why you're mad at Mommy?" My chest tightened. How could I explain this to her without completely shattering her world? I took a deep breath and said, "Katie, sometimes adults make mistakes. Big mistakes. And when that happens, it can take some time to figure things out. But I need you to know that no matter what, I love you. That will never change." She nodded, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. "Do you still love Mommy?" she asked, her voice so small it broke my heart. I didn't know what to say. Lying felt wrong, but the truth was too heavy for a 10-year-old to carry. So I said the only thing I could. "I'll always care about Mommy because she's your mom. And no matter what happens between us, we both love you more than anything in the world." She seemed to accept that, at least for now. She leaned her head against my shoulder, and I wrapped my arm around her, trying to shield her from the storm as best as I could. That night, after Katie went to bed, I sat in the dark living room, staring at nothing. I kept replaying everything in my head. The DVD, the emails, Sarah's excuses, Mark's pathetic apology, Katie's questions. I felt like I was drowning, and no matter how hard I tried to tread water, I couldn't keep my head above the surface. I knew I had to make a decision soon. This limbo wasn't sustainable, not for me and definitely not for Katie. But every option felt like it would tear my family apart in one way or another. All I could do was wait for the next wave to hit. 2 days passed before Sarah reached out again. I'd been living in a fog, just going through the motions for Katie's sake. My mind couldn't stop racing. Every time I thought I'd hit rock bottom, something would remind me of what happened, and I'd sink even lower. When Sarah finally texted, I wasn't surprised. "Can we talk? Please. I'll come over whenever you're ready." I stared at the screen, debating whether to ignore her or face her. Avoiding her felt easier, but it wasn't a solution. If this was going to end, I needed closure. I texted back. "Fine. Tomorrow after Katie goes to bed." That night she showed up right on time. She looked rough, hair unkempt, dark circles under her eyes, wearing an old hoodie like she hadn't cared about her appearance in days. For a second I almost felt bad for her. Almost. She stepped inside, glancing around like she was afraid to see how much damage she'd caused. "Where's Katie?" she asked softly. "Asleep," I said curtly, motioning for her to sit at the kitchen table. "Let's get this over with." She flinched at my tone but sat down anyway. "I know I don't deserve to ask for your forgiveness," she began, her voice trembling. "But I need you to know how sorry I am. I never wanted to hurt you or Katie." "Then why did you do it?" I asked, leaning forward. "Why, Sarah? Was our life not good enough for you?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "It's not that. I don't even know how it got to this point. At first it was just, I felt invisible. Like I didn't matter anymore. You were always working and I needed someone to notice me." I laughed bitterly. "So instead of talking to me you turned to strangers and Mark of all people. Do you even realize what you've done? You've destroyed our marriage, our family. Katie is already starting to ask questions, and I have no idea what to tell her." Her tears spilled over. "I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve another chance, but I can't lose you. I can't lose Katie. Please, we can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." therapy, counseling, anything. I shook my head. It's too late for that, Sarah. You didn't just break my trust, you shattered it. How am I supposed to believe anything you say after this? I'll prove it to you, she said desperately. I'll cut contact with Mark, block him on everything. I'll be completely transparent. I just need a chance to make this right. You think cutting off Mark fixes this? I asked, my voice rising. Mark isn't the problem, Sarah. You are. You made the choice to cheat, to lie, to jeopardize everything we built together. Blocking him doesn't erase what you've done. She reached across the table, trying to grab my hand, but I pulled away. Please, she begged. For Katie's sake, can't we at least try? I don't want her to grow up in a broken home. Her words hit a nerve. Katie was the only reason I hadn't filed for divorce yet. The thought of splitting custody, of not being there for her every day, made me sick. But staying together for her sake? How could I live with someone I couldn't even look at without feeling betrayed? I don't know, Sarah, I said finally, my voice hollow. Right now, I don't see a way forward. Maybe that'll change, but I'm not making any promises. Her face crumpled, but she nodded. I'll wait, she said. As long as it takes. I'll do whatever you need me to do. I didn't respond. I just stood up and walked her to the door. As she stepped outside, she turned to me, her eyes full of desperation. I love you, she said. I didn't say it back. I just closed the door and locked it behind her. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Sarah's words kept echoing in my mind, but I didn't feel comforted or reassured. I felt trapped. No matter what decision I made, someone would get hurt. Sarah, Katie, me. There was no winning in this situation. The days following Sarah's visit were a blur. I tried to focus on Katie, making sure she felt safe and loved, but I could tell she sensed something was off. She started asking more questions about Sarah, when she was coming home, why she wasn't around as much. I kept my answers vague, but it was only a matter of time before she realized the truth. Meanwhile, I couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah wasn't telling me everything. The way she hesitated when I confronted her, the half-hearted excuses, it all felt like there was more to the story. And then there was Mark. As much as I wanted to leave him in the past, his involvement kept gnawing at me. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I knew it wasn't healthy, I should have been focusing on moving forward, but I couldn't help myself. I logged into Sarah's old laptop again, scrolling through her emails and messages with fresh eyes. Most of what I found was stuff I'd already seen, but then I stumbled on something new. It was an email Sarah had sent to Mark just 2 weeks before I found the DVD. I'm scared he's going to find out, it read. We need to be more careful. If he ever finds out about us, it'll destroy him. The timestamp hit me like a punch to the gut. 2 weeks. She was still lying, still covering for him, even after all this time. I kept scrolling, and that's when I found a chain of messages from a third man, a name I didn't recognize. At first it was casual, like she was just venting about her marital struggles, but then it escalated. Flirty comments, suggestive jokes, plans to meet up. My stomach churned as I realized this wasn't just about Mark. There were others. I slammed the laptop shut, breathing heavily. How many lies had she told me? How much of our life together had been a lie? That night I called Sarah. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, she said cautiously. We need to talk, I said, my voice cold. Okay, she said hesitantly. What's going on? I know about the others, I said bluntly. There was a long pause. Then she let out a shaky breath. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, Sarah. I saw the messages. Mark wasn't the only one, was he? She didn't respond, and her silence was all the confirmation I needed. How many, Sarah? I demanded. How many other men were there? It wasn't like that, she said quickly. Mark was the only one but there were a few times You what? I snapped. Flirted? Planned to meet up? Lied to my face while I was raising our daughter and trusting you. I never met up with anyone else, she insisted. It was just stupid messages. I was feeling lonely and wanted attention, but it didn't mean anything. I swear. Nothing about this means anything to you, does it? I said, my voice rising. Do you even care about what you've done? Or is this all just some game to you? Of course I care. She cried. I hate myself for what I've done. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm trying. I'm trying to fix this. Fix it. I laughed bitterly. You can't fix this, Sarah. You can't erase what you've done. And you sure as hell can't expect me to trust you ever again. There was another long silence before she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. What are you going to do? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I know one thing, I'm done being lied to. From now on, it's all about Katie. She's the only thing that matters to me now. With that, I hung up, cutting off whatever excuse she was about to make. I sat there in the dark, my phone still in my hand. The betrayal felt deeper now, like it had grown roots and spread through every part of my life. But at least I had clarity. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't keep living like this. A week later, it was Katie's birthday. She'd been talking about it non-stop for months, excited for the party we had planned. A small get-together with her friends from school, a cake she picked out herself and some games in the backyard. It was supposed to be a happy day, a distraction from everything that had been weighing me down. Sarah texted me the morning of the party. Can I come to Katie's birthday? Please. I want to be there for her. I'll stay out of your way. I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to tell her no, that she'd already done enough damage, but Katie deserved to have both her parents there, even if it meant swallowing my pride for a few hours. Fine, I replied. But this is about Katie. Don't try to pull anything. Sarah arrived an hour before the party started, carrying a carefully wrapped gift and a nervous smile. She looked at me like she wanted to say something, but I walked past her without a word. When Katie saw her, she lit up. Mommy. She squealed, running into Sarah's arms. Watching them hug, I felt a pang of something I couldn't quite describe. Jealousy, maybe, or resentment. Sarah didn't deserve that kind of love from Katie, not after what she'd done. The party itself went off without a hitch. Katie was beaming the whole time, running around with her friends, showing off her new toys, and laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. Sarah stayed on the sidelines, watching quietly and occasionally glancing at me like she was waiting for some kind of signal. I ignored her. It wasn't until after the party, when Katie was busy opening her presents, that Sarah finally approached me. Thank you for letting me come, she said softly. I crossed my arms. I didn't do it for you. She flinched but nodded. I know. I want to be part of her life, no matter what happens between us. I hope you'll let me. That's up to Katie, I said flatly. But don't think for a second that I'm going to let you hurt her the way you hurt me. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. I'm trying, you know, she said. To be better. For her. For you. Don't do it for me, I said. Do it because it's the bare minimum you owe her as her mother. Before she could respond, Katie ran over, holding up one of her new toys. Look, Daddy. Mommy, look. She said excitedly, completely oblivious to the tension between us. Sarah smiled, wiping her eyes quickly before crouching down to Katie's level. That's amazing, sweetie, she said, her voice bright and cheerful. Watching them, I felt the weight of the situation pressing down on me again. No matter how much I wanted to cut Sarah out of my life, she was still Katie's mom. And as much as it killed me to admit it, Katie needed her. After the party, Sarah stayed long enough to help clean up. When she finally left, she hesitated at the door, looking back at me. Thank you again, she said. For letting me be here. I didn't respond. I just closed the door behind her and leaned against it, exhaustion washing over me. That night, after Katie was in bed, I sat in the living room with a drink in my hand, staring at the wall. The party had been a temporary distraction, but now all the feelings I'd been suppressing came rushing back. Anger, sadness, confusion. I thought about Katie, how happy she'd been to have both of us there. Could I really take that away from her? Could I really force her to grow up in a broken home because of Sarah's mistakes? The thought made my chest tighten. I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing. Whatever happened next, it had to be for Katie's sake. A few days after Katie's birthday, I was settling into a routine, if you could call it that. Sarah was still staying at her sister's place, and we kept contact to a minimum, only texting about Katie. I'd been trying to focus on work and staying busy, but the weight of everything hadn't lifted. I still felt stuck, unable to move forward while my mind kept dragging me backward. Then something happened that I didn't see coming. I got a message on Facebook from someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Julie, an old friend of Sarah's. We'd all been close back in the day, but she moved out of state a few years ago and we lost touch. Her message was short. "Hey, I know this is out of the blue, but I need to tell you something about Sarah. Can we talk?" My first thought was to ignore it. I wasn't in the mood to rehash everything with someone who'd been out of our lives for so long. But curiosity got the better of me. I replied and we set up a call that evening. When I answered, Julie got straight to the point. "I heard about what happened," she said, her tone serious. "Word travels fast, huh?" I muttered, already regretting the call. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't mean to bring it up like that. I feel like you deserve to know the full story." "What are you talking about?" I asked, sitting up. She hesitated, and I could hear her take a deep breath. "Look, I don't want to make things worse for you, but this isn't the first time Sarah's done something like this." I felt my stomach drop. "What?" "When we were in college," she said slowly, "Sarah cheated on her boyfriend back then too. It was a big mess. She swore she'd never do it again, but I guess old habits die hard." I didn't know how to respond. Julie kept talking, explaining how Sarah had a pattern of keeping secrets and making bad decisions when she felt unnoticed or underappreciated. She said she'd always hoped Sarah had changed after we got married, but now she wasn't so sure. "I'm sorry to dump this on you," Julie said finally. "I just thought you should know." I thanked her, hung up and sat there in stunned silence. Sarah had always painted herself as someone who valued loyalty and trust, but now I was starting to wonder if I'd ever truly known her at all. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. I thought back to the early years of our relationship, trying to remember if there had been red flags I'd ignored. Was this always who she was, or had something changed along the way? When Sarah texted me the next day to check on Katie, I didn't respond right away. Instead, I called her. "Is everything okay?" she asked when she picked up, her voice cautious. "I talked to Julie," I said. There was a long pause. Then she sighed. "What did she say?" "She told me about college," I said bluntly. "About how this isn't the first time you've cheated." "Michael," she started, but I cut her off. "Don't," I said sharply. "I don't want your excuses. I just want the truth. Were there others before me? Is this just who you are?" She was silent for a moment before she finally spoke. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "I made mistakes in the past. But I thought I'd left all that behind when I married you. I never wanted to hurt you like this." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to yell, to scream at her, but I didn't have the energy. "I don't know what to believe anymore," I said. "Every time I think I've hit the bottom, I find out there's more." "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I don't deserve your trust, but I swear I've told you everything now. There's nothing else." I didn't believe her. How could I? "From now on, we keep this about Katie," I said firmly. "I'll never stop you from being her mom, but as for us? There is no us. Not anymore." She started crying, but I hung up before I could hear more. I couldn't take it. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I was finally done. After my call with Sarah, I knew I had to make things official. It wasn't enough to say we were done. I needed to put it in writing to protect myself and Katie from whatever fallout might come next. The next day, I made an appointment with a divorce lawyer. Walking into that office was surreal. I never imagined my marriage would come to this, that I'd be sitting across from a lawyer talking about custody and dividing assets. But there I was, explaining everything. Sarah's infidelity, the DVD, the emails, the impact on Katie. The lawyer listened carefully, nodding as I spoke, and when I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "You have a strong case," she said. "But it's going to be a process. Are you prepared for that?" I nodded. I don't have a choice. I just want to do what's best for Katie. We discussed custody arrangements, financial matters, and how to handle the house. The lawyer explained that while infidelity doesn't always play a huge role in divorce settlements, the evidence I had, especially the DVD, could work in my favor if things got messy. When I left the office, I felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, I was relieved to finally be taking action. On the other, the reality of divorce was sinking in. This wasn't just about ending a marriage, it was about uprooting my entire life. That evening, I texted Sarah to let her know I'd spoken to a lawyer. We need to start discussing custody and the divorce. I want to keep this as civil as possible for Katie's sake. She called me almost immediately. You went to a lawyer? She asked, her voice shaking. Yes, I said calmly. This isn't working, Sarah. We both know that. It's time to move forward. But we haven't even tried counseling, she said desperately. We can fix this, Michael. Please don't give up on us. There is no us anymore, I said firmly. This isn't about fixing the marriage. It's about making sure Katie has a stable future. That's all I care about now. She was crying, but I didn't let it affect me. I'd heard enough apologies and promises. None of them meant anything anymore. In the days that followed, Sarah started sending me long emails, pleading for another chance. She brought up every good memory we'd shared, every milestone we'd celebrated together, trying to convince me that we could get back to that place. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on Katie. I started taking her out more. Trips to the park, ice cream after school, movie nights at home. I wanted to make sure she felt secure, even as her world was quietly falling apart. One evening, as we were watching a movie, she turned to me and asked, "Is Mommy coming back?" The question caught me off guard. I paused the movie and looked at her, trying to figure out how to explain something so complicated to a 10-year-old. I don't know, sweetie, I said honestly. Mommy and I are trying to figure some things out. But no matter what happens, we both love you very much. That's never going to change. She nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes. It broke my heart. Later that night, I sat down with a notebook and started listing out all the things I needed to do: logistics for the divorce, plans for co-parenting, ways to support Katie through the transition. It felt overwhelming, but for the first time in weeks, I had a sense of direction. I wasn't sure what the future would look like, but I knew one thing: I had to keep moving forward, for Katie's sake if nothing else. A week after I told Sarah I was filing for divorce, she showed up unannounced at the house. I didn't want to let her in, but Katie saw her at the door and ran over, so I didn't have much choice. After a quick hug with Katie, Sarah pulled me aside. "Can we talk for just a minute?" she asked softly. "Make it quick," I said, keeping my tone flat. She took a deep breath, clearly nervous. "I want to try mediation," she said. "No lawyers, no fighting. We can sit down with someone neutral and figure this out like adults, for Katie." I studied her for a moment, unsure if this was a genuine offer or another way to stall. "You really think that's going to fix anything?" "It's not about fixing us," she said quickly. "It's about making this as easy as possible for Katie. I don't want to fight you, Michael. I just want us to co-parent the best way we can." Her words caught me off guard. She sounded sincere, and for the first time in weeks I wondered if she might actually mean it. "Fine," I said finally. "I'll think about it." "Thank you," she said, relief washing over her face. After she left, I sat down with Katie, who was busy drawing at the kitchen table. "Mommy really wants to be around more," she said innocently, not looking up from her picture. I didn't know how to respond, so I just ruffled her hair and said, "We'll see, kiddo." That night, I wondered if mediation might actually work, or if I was setting myself up for another round of disappointment. 2 weeks later, Sarah and I sat across from each other in a small conference room with a mediator. It felt surreal, like something out of a bad dream. The mediator, a middle-aged woman with a calm, professional demeanor, started by laying out the rules. No interruptions, no shouting, just a constructive conversation to figure out custody and the divorce settlement. Sarah spoke first. "I want joint custody," she said. "I don't want to be a part-time mom. Katie deserves both of us in her life." I clenched my jaw but stayed calm. Joint custody is fine, I said, but I want primary physical custody. Katie needs stability, and that means staying in the house in the same school with the same routine. She's been through enough already. Sarah looked like she wanted to argue, but the mediator cut in. This sounds like a good starting point. Joint custody with primary residence staying with Michael. Do you agree, Sarah? She hesitated, then nodded. Fine. As long as I can see her regularly. We moved on to other topics: child support, holidays, who would get the house. Sarah wanted to sell it and split the money, but I refused. This is Katie's home, I said firmly. She shouldn't lose that too. The mediator suggested a compromise. I'd keep the house, but Sarah would get a slightly larger share of our savings to make up for it. It wasn't ideal, but I agreed. By the end of the session, we had the framework for an agreement. It wasn't perfect, but it was civil. As we left the office, Sarah turned to me. Thank you, she said. For being reasonable. I didn't respond. I just walked to my car, feeling drained but oddly lighter. Maybe this was the start of something better, or at least something manageable. The weeks after mediation were strange, but they brought a sense of stability I hadn't felt in months. The agreement was finalized: joint custody, with Katie living primarily with me and spending weekends with Sarah. The house stayed mine, and Sarah moved into a small apartment nearby. Katie adjusted better than I expected. She missed having her mom around every day, but she seemed to like the routine we established. On weekdays I made her breakfast, dropped her at school, helped with homework and read her stories before bed. On weekends, Sarah would pick her up and take her out for activities, trying to make the most of her time. As for Sarah and me, we kept things polite but distant. Most of our conversations were about Katie, her school, her friends, her soccer practices. Sarah occasionally tried to bring up the past, apologizing again or saying she wanted to earn back my trust, but I shut it down every time. My walls were up and I wasn't letting them down. One night, after dropping Katie off at Sarah's for the weekend, I came home to a quiet house. Normally the silence would have eaten at me, but this time it felt different. Peaceful almost. I sat on the couch with a beer, staring at the pictures on the wall. Family vacations, Katie's school photos, moments from a life that felt so far away now. It hit me then: I was okay. Not great, not happy, but okay. I had Katie. I had my home. And I had the chance to start fresh, to rebuild a life that wasn't defined by betrayal. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. A few months later I signed the final divorce papers. It felt surreal, like closing the book on a chapter one never wanted to write. Sarah didn't say much when we met to finalize everything, just a quiet thank you for everything before walking away. Life slowly found a rhythm. Katie was thriving, and that's all I could have asked for. I started going to the gym again, reconnecting with old friends, even thinking about dating someday. I wasn't rushing anything. I was focused on being the best dad I could be. As for Sarah, she stayed in the background. She was there for Katie, but I kept my distance. The pain of what she'd done didn't fade overnight, but it became easier to carry. I didn't forgive her, not fully, but I stopped letting my anger control me. One evening, as Katie and I were playing a board game, she looked up at me and said, "Daddy, are you happy?" Her question caught me off guard. I thought about it for a moment, then smiled. "Yeah, kiddo," I said. "I think I am." And for the first time in what felt like forever, it was the truth.